Hi there, and thanks for joining us for this week's Leading Edge. I'm your host, Jeff Smith. Our guest this week has been called a driving force. He's been called a change maker. He's been called a visionary. But those phrases in Maumee have not always been terms of endearment. There have been public calls for his removal and the removal of Mayor Jim McDonald and calls for the removal of virtually every member of Maumee's City Council. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the Maumee City Administrator, Patrick Birch, led on during a City Council meeting that enough was enough.
Some of the comments on Facebook and some of the threats I get, some of the texts I get, some of the calls I get, some of the people driving by my house, calling me names, throwing stuff in my yard. I mean, that is ridiculous. Somebody's going to get hurt. Last night, somebody came to my door at 8 o'clock at night, after dark. My wife and I didn't want to answer the door. We were afraid that somebody was on the other side of that with a gun. This isn't the first community I've been in where somebody ran door to door to get rid of me and ends up being a friend of mine once they realize, when they get in, they realize, oh my gosh, this isn't run as bad as I thought. There's a lot of information I don't have. There's a lot of things that you do that I'm not even aware of because outside looking in seems so different.
Maumee City Administrator Patrick Birch joining us here on Leading Edge this week. Was that off the cuff? Did you go into that meeting thinking, I'm going to say exactly this? No, actually, it's a feeling that I get, and when I see people in the audience or I see people that have typically been people who have said things on social media about me and so on, it hits you, right? I keep a lot of that bottled up. And it was true that somebody came to my house. It wasn't somebody who was there to threaten me, but we didn't know. Right. And it was odd for somebody to come to our house after dark and ring the doorbell. And my wife started to get up. We thought, wait a minute. Let's really consider what we're doing here. Had there been other things that led up to that evening to make you think, pause? Well, council was somebody was one of our council meetings about a year ago, not even quite a year ago. A gentleman in the parking lot to some council members said that, you know, if you're in a third world country, you'd all be shot. This gentleman, I mean, it's just a lot of that kind of stuff, and I think it's come from it's happening in our national discussion in terms of people's worldview. They think that this is okay, and that people that serve in the public sector aren't human beings. I wanted to include the third part of that, where you said somebody gets to know me, gets to know what I'm discussing, what I'm talking about, and ends up being a friend. How many of those moments, how many of those transition moments have existed? Because the reason I wanted to have you on here today, Patrick, and we've talked about this beforehand, but I wanted kind of an airing of what has been going on in the city of Maumee. We haven't had a chance to sit down. You and I have shared a lot of emails back and forth, and you've been so gracious to answer all of our questions here at WTOL. But my question being kind of the transition from somebody being foe to friend. Is that fair? Well, yeah, it is. And it's happened throughout my career. I've never been asked to leave a job, never been fired, and there's a reason for that, because I am an aggressive type leader. I'm somebody who, I'm a change agent. I truly believe that if you don't become an agent of change, you become a victim of it. So I'm the kind of person who will push, and at some point, abrasive? Would you? Well, I don't know that that's the case. I'm direct, right? I'm not going to scream at somebody. I'm not going to raise my voice, but if I look at a way to do a deal that I think is in the best interest of the community I serve, that's where I'm going to go. Even if I think it might be unpopular. Because I don't know that when I talk to people. Is it fair to say there's been a lot of unpopularity among some of the things? Well, I don't know if that's the case, right? At some point, when somebody gets really angry and they're trying to create that anger, everything that you do becomes a way to twist it to something that's unpopular, right? I mean, I think you can say something on social media that would normally not raise any ire, and if it's like we pass emergency ordinances. Literally every community in this state, that's the way that the state constitution is set up, is that you pass emergencies. What it means, it just takes immediate effect. Right. You don't go through the three readings, correct? Well, when I first got here, we did 298 ordinances. Almost every one of those were emergencies. And I asked council, is there a way we can start weaning down? We were at 31 last year, and every year since then, because of transparency. But I think what happens is you start creating policies. I don't create policies, I simply recommend. But when you start doing that, people have a tendency, if they're angry about something, everything, it's like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So it's like, I have a tendency when I do things, if you're on board of those things, you tend to look at things, everything that comes that way, as a positive.
Yeah.
But if you're angry, really angry about something, and you're trying to turn a narrative in a community, it's in your best interest to turn everything the city council does as being a negative.
Let me ask you what Rich Carr, when he brought you in, what was his definition of what he needed in you?
Well, I was interviewed by a large committee of people, and they asked me a lot of EPA questions, not because of what we had to go through. I found that out 3 or 4 weeks after I got here,
Yeah.
and I don't think they were like a deer in headlights when I said it, but when I told them about the sewage issue. But they asked me, what would you do with North Conant? And I said very clearly, I said, it looks like it did when I was 16 and a skate guard at Ohio State.
That's just it. I wanted to make sure people knew you weren't blind to Northwest Ohio. You grew up here. You went to high school at Anthony Wayne.
I did. And my dad was a city firefighter here for the city of Toledo, and my mom worked for the Teamsters Union on Hawley and the Trail. And, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. My brothers and sisters always went here. My family, the Birch family, has engineers and lawyers and
But back to when they asked you about Conant, what you would do.
They asked me about what I would do with North Conant, and I said, a lot of this has got to be rebuilt. You can't assume that the 1970s parking lot layout is with no trees and no vegetation in a space that nobody feels comfortable in is what you need. They asked me point blank, and I said, if I was to recommend, I would make sure the trail felt less intimidating to divide your town, and Conant would feel less intimidating to divide your town. I said at some point there were studies done in '86 about when they built the Maumee Perrysburg Bridge. The projections were that in 2010 you'd be roughly 47,000 trips a day and 51,000 cars a day by the time 2017 hit. Well, at the time we had 26,500 cars a day. That's about what we have now. It never changed. So at some point, as public officials, 30 years later, we have to admit we made a mistake.
I want to ask you about the visionary part,
Sure.
Specific to Dundee experience, Jackson, Michigan. I want to read something, a newspaper article in 2020 that you can find on mlive.com. It had a headline that read, "Love him or loathe him, the feather-ruffling Patrick Birch changed Jackson." The article went on, and I'm sure you've seen this, Patrick, but Birch knew he'd have to ruffle a lot of feathers to make Jackson the city he envisioned. But after 7 years of ruffling, the pushback started taking its toll. Quote, you said, "When you know you're going into it, realizing you're stirring up a fire by blowing oxygen on that fire and it could burn you, that's a tough decision to make. But it's not a decision I'm willing to go back on." The barrage of citizens spewing disdain for him at the city council meeting occasionally got to him. He'd sometimes argue back during public comment and later said the vitriol was one of the reasons he knew it was time to move on. This pattern played out here in Maumee as well. Are you just saying it's kind of the nature of not accepting change? Or the way it's being implemented? Because I go back to the water issue. Yeah. With the high exorbitant water bills that people had to endure and the calls that we got here and the conversations that we had, the sewage, the making sure your property was kept up to standard.
Yeah. Well, I tend to believe that when you make a change, if a man or a woman's ideal of change is dependent upon that change not happening, change is hard. So I get it. The issue is, though, is that a lot of communities, and like I've said to many other, I said the same thing in Jackson, the city council there, and to Dundee, is that we don't have time. As public officials, we tend to make decisions based on popularity versus what really needs to be done. And my whole career has been about what I thought needed to be done. Councils went along with that, not because I had puppet strings. Yeah. I served a lot of very intelligent people on city council. I have a great council now that are very well educated, know the stuff inside and out. But the way you order something in terms of how you position it about whether or not it builds a vision for the future is important. And there's a lot of city managers that have had a tremendous amount of time and jobs in their career. And I look at somebody, and if they've a city manager that's had 12 jobs in their career, I'm guessing they couldn't find a way to make that work.
Make it stick. We got to take our first break, Patrick. You stick around?
Sure.
All right.
Thank
We're going to continue our conversation on his vision coming up here in just a bit. Stay with us. Maumee City Administrator Patrick Birch joining us here for the first time on Leading Edge. Glad to have you with us. Let's talk a little bit about the vision. You said I'm not the only savior of Jackson, Michigan in my time when I was there. 7 years you were there, if I remember correctly. And when you bring a vision to a city like Maumee, what are you bringing in? Are you thinking jobs? Are you thinking from a physical attractiveness? All of that, all of the above?
Well, when I was younger in my career, I was that guy who chased jobs. Your career was based on getting more companies, spreading out. But as you grew in, when I went to Jackson, I spent most of my career as a staunch conservative. But when I realized, when I got to communities that had a lot of people of color and a lot of diversity, a lot of things that I didn't understand to be true, a lot of poverty, it starts to change your worldview. My paradigm changed, right? So we started looking at ways to create a community or create spaces where people felt comfortable in. And then it's kind of like the old create the business environment and they will come, but I think that happens for people. And
but is that regardless of how that impacts the almighty dollar, the pocketbook for those residents?
Well, at some point, some of that can be done for very little money. It's just creating spaces, right? You know it when you go into some place and the restaurant feels like a cafeteria and the ceilings are high and it echoes. You don't feel as comfortable as you do in a nice place that has a fireplace, it's cozier. It makes you feel differently. That's the idea.
So are you saying that takes more money to build that atmosphere?
Not necessarily. I think it's about being an interrupter, right? At some point we see the road. Antwayne Trail it needs to be fixed. So the first thing we do is decide to widen it. Do we really need to widen it? By widening it, are we increasing the speed?
Yeah.
Are we creating a space that people don't look at, doesn't feel interesting, that it's a place to drive through rather than arrive at? I really have a philosophy about creating places where people want to go and want to spend time.
I want to fly through some photos and show people at home, and I want you to kind of talk about what you see and through your management style, what you have brought to the table as we look at these, if we can go ahead and show. And obviously, Conant has been a big part of discussion over the last couple of years as far as what the vision was there for making it more of a showplace.
Well, it's not just that, right? 3 weeks after I got here, I was walking with council members around. It's a March, and I started March, April. It was a warm day, and I saw a couple in front of us walking down Wayne Street. And this is on the east side of Conant, where the cars are right on the curb, and they're traveling 50 miles an hour. It doesn't feel safe. So I walked down there, and I said, without even knowing, I asked the council person I was with to stop here and see how they cross Wayne. Well, the couple that was there didn't cross at the crosswalk, which is right on the edge of traffic because we saved money and put ramps right on the edge of the radius.
They went right in the middle of the street.
They actually went behind the stop bar in front of the car and jumped the curb to get away from speeding traffic on the road. That's what I'm hoping to show people. Did it feel comfortable to walk uptown with your baby in a baby carriage or to enjoy yourself downtown? Because there aren't many people who didn't believe that unless those trees were there, nobody would walk on that street, because those trees are fixed hazardous objects for a driver. And if we make drivers feel less safe doing so, then they'll travel slower.
You had a meeting earlier this week in downtown Toledo. You had people from Perrysburg who came to that meeting and kind of complimented what is happening in Maumee.
Yeah, that was actually last night at Ernest.
Well, airing Sunday. We're taping on Thursday.
Oh, okay. Okay. There were people from Waterville, there were people from Perrysburg, people from Sylvania, people from in downtown Toledo. And I think people buy into the idea that their community can be strong simply because it feels good to be there.
Do other people say to you, Patrick, you take a lot of crap?
I hear it all the time. People apologize if they're the ones that have to apologize. I don't treat other people like that, and I wouldn't expect people to treat me that way. But it happens. What's really bothersome to me is that people who are professing faith in Christ are some of the worst offenders to me. I don't understand that. I don't. And when I talked to my pastor about it, we had a long talk about it one day, and it's baffling. Because I think people I think it's because we as Americans have now become so individualistic that we forget to care for the collective whole. And that's really what building a strong community is about, is building a collective whole. And you've always got that individual, it's my right. It's my right to have really low taxes. And my point was last night is that when you look at the infrastructure of most communities, and the Strongtown says that most cities are insolvent, they just don't know it yet. Because historically, cities haven't accounted for their infrastructure the way you would a pension. So you have to show them as liabilities, not assets, because they depreciate. You can't pick up your water and sewer lines and sell them. So the idea that if you look at just the city of Maumee, if you were to place every bit of infrastructure in Maumee, it's $1.7 billion.
Let me ask you before we go to our break, I got about a minute for this answer, but when you came in, were you told that we had to make up for the sins of this city's fathers? And I'm talking about the Maumee River pollution. I'm talking about some of the other mistakes of the past.
No, I actually reported it. I contacted Rich Carr, and I said, Rich, we got a problem. Those pumps that are out there are actually pumping sewage, so it's not to flood people's basements. So I don't blame anybody at staff for having done that, because they were catch-22. Do I flood basement? That's a federal crime. If I pump to the river, it's a federal crime. But one, you had to choose because one was a more acute public health risk in somebody's basement. So I understand that. But I told him, I said, within 3-4 weeks of being here, I said, we got a problem. I'm going to have to report Maumee to the EPA. I can either stick around to help fix it, or I can leave, but I still got to report. And we had a council meeting, and we talked about it. Council was very clear. They were shocked. They said, we got to report ourselves. And somehow they got twisted in that we got caught. Actually, I just happened to talk to somebody about why our bill had gone up so severely one month, but it happened to be after large rain events in the last quarter, and immediately, because I'd done sewer separation before, thought we've got a SSO problem.
I want to go to our break. We're going to talk about why you believe Maumee's best days are ahead in the next segment. We'll be back right after this. Our guest this week has been Maumee City Administrator Patrick Birch. We went to break. I said you want to kind of profess that some of Maumee's best days are ahead of it. And I also want to put out there, obviously, we've talked about the negative, but there are groups, Unite Maumee, one of them, that have kind of embrace the changes in what they're seeing, and knowing that there's been some growing pains to get through.
There are. I do think Maumee's best days are ahead of them. And I'm not saying there weren't good days in the past and there were good times, but I think at some point communities have to change, and they have to change for the better or they die. So I think there's a lot of people, and I had 5 meetings today from people who were calling me about sewer. Really wonderful people. There are a number of really wonderful people in Maumee who don't get led by social media, who understand that you have to pay for what you get. That's how this works. So I think with some of the positive changes in Maumee and some of the business
You're
growth
talking about some of the laterals that have to be done?
Yeah.
Okay.
The laterals. I mean, the city is paying for those through the rates. That's why the rates are high. So either you pay for it yourself, what people are angry about, or you pay a rate to do it. People have to pay for their stuff, and it's not, there's nobody else but the 13,500 residents in Maumee that have to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. I want to bring a picture up. Yeah, we wanted to talk about Arrowhead a little bit, and I think everybody's been so centrally focused on what happens on the north side of Salisbury and Dussel, but you're talking south side, but however, this, I believe, is north side,
It's north side. It's around the Pinnacle.
Yeah. So talk about what we're seeing here and how far off this is.
Yeah,
Is that 475 in the background?
It is.
Okay.
And the Andersons is across the expressway, their headquarters.
Okay.
So what this is a very large 510-unit market rate complex. The corridor building you're seeing on the far right is a 4-story building that has dog wash stations. It's something you would see in a Cincinnati or Cleveland area or Columbus.
Did you seek out this concept, or it was brought to you guys?
They looked at the mall.
Yeah.
They looked at Fallen Timbers Mall about almost 4 years ago now, And it takes a long time to put economic development projects together. When somebody sits there and says, well, I'm thinking about coming here, and they expect it to happen right now, it doesn't happen that fast. So Metropolitan Holdings contacted us and thought, we believe the market. They've done their housing studies, and they believe the central highest income level is actually centered between Fallen Timbers Mall and Dussel Drive.
Yeah.
And that's what their studies show. And these large companies don't do things accidentally. They are very measured. They're very expert at where they locate these units. And these are expensive units. These aren't cheap.
Let me ask you this. All the work that's being done on 475, obviously opening up Illinois Avenue right there, but how much of that is a catalyst? We've got about a minute left, a catalyst in bringing more businesses, bringing more residential, bringing potential of jobs.
Well, I believe we've created enough jobs in Arrowhead in the last 3 years to make up what we lost at St. Luke's, which is unfortunate, really unfortunate. But I do believe that Arrowhead is going to see a resurgence. But it sees a resurgence because we're rethinking how we do government. We're rethinking about how we incentivize just having office parks, because we know that old 1978 philosophy doesn't work anymore. We have to put mixed use where people can walk to work. That's why we're developing the new Epstein Park inside there.
30 seconds, you brought it up. Is there a plan in 2025 for the St. Luke's property?
We're working with Mercy on that project. I believe there will be something coming, but I'll have to leave that up to them because I don't want to get involved in or usurp their authority on their property.
Of course. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time, being so open to the conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We appreciate it as always. Patrick Birch, Maumee City Administrator. We'll wrap things up right after this.
Thank you.
Really glad to have you with us here on Leading Edge in 2025. Some great guests, some great topics. You can always find any part of our conversations on the WTOL 11 YouTube page and, of course, on WTOL 11 Plus.